Well, I thought I'd do a long form video for you guys. Haven't done one in a bit. And I need to get a lot of this spaghetti out of this 1980 Vibrolux Reverb. And I thought I'd just take you along on a spaghetti removal quest. Now, we've got a decision to make. First off, at the tube sockets, some of the wires are slightly crimped over. Some of them are not. And some of the solder joints aren't that great. We'll be cleaning all that up in the process anyway. If this were a 60s amp without all this wax, it'd be much easier to do all the shortening at the board connection. But when I do that, I'm going to make puddles of wax everywhere. So I'm going to try to do all my work at the socket end of things and just see how it goes. I may change course midstream. And I may be talking about a bunch of different stuff throughout the course of this video because I'm going to have a lot of dead space where you just hear me grunting to myself otherwise. And that's not that great. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if the old solder heats up on its own or if I need to add any fresh solder to it to help it along. Now, this old shielded stuff that Fender used, besides the fact that it has a lot of excess and I can shorten that, you can see how much the jacket melts when it gets hot. So when I reconnect these, I'll try to take that into account. We'll get all this cleaned up quite a bit. And the other thing I should say at this point is before you start doing what I'm doing, you have to know where everything goes back. I'm about to take everything apart, it has to go back, right? So unless you're already very sure where everything goes, and this is my 1000th something Fender, so I've got all this memorized. Take notes, take pictures, make drawings, whatever you need to do, so you can put it back the way it's supposed to be, just with a lot less spaghetti. And I just have the camera set up for an overhead shot that I know I can zoom areas in post, and hopefully everything will stay focused. Figured this way, be less likely to obstruct things with my hands. All right, so that's looking pretty good. That heater joint there, at pin 9, needs a little extra solder, I think. Doesn't take much. I'm going to get some of this old solder off these pins. Sometimes I can get in there with a solder sucker, and sometimes it wants to fight me due to the angle of attack. Trying to make sure I don't burn the wire next to where I'm working. I know this is very exciting to watch, but I know that a small percentage of viewers very much like this kind of thing. And, I always have to remember if I were starting out doing this, wanted to get into this, stuff like this, though it's kind of long to watch. There's a lot of good tips to pick up along the way, some of which I'll verbalize. Others will just be stuff for you guys to figure out based on what you see if you pay attention. Now, I'll get all this solder off here so I have a clean slate to restart everything. I'm going to talk about one of the tone quests I'm on. Not that I have a lot of spare time right now, but little bits here and there. I've been trying to keep up with all the digital modeling stuff. If for no other reason, to know how long it's going to be before I'm totally out of a job, because the digital stuff is going to get so good people won't be using amps at all. There's also the eventual lack of availability of tubes to consider. So I don't want amps to just be like a Rolex watch. Yeah, they exist, but only the wealthiest can have them, or would even be interested in them to begin with. But anyway, I've been playing around with the Tonex stuff and the HX Stomp stuff, and the Tonex stuff has the potential to be better at the amp modeling, specifically the amp modeling than the HX. The HX has some good sounding amp stuff. It's just a little bit harder to get realistic. You definitely want to use external IRs for that. Real quick, this is the cathode that's shared between them two. I'm shortening that cathode length, and I want to make sure that it's dressed well so there's no tension at either end. So I'm going to kind of give it a little bend there, a little bend there. Just take off the last, quarter inch or so. And I like to have the cathode done first, so everything else runs over the cathode. The cathode kind of gives a little bit of shielding to any signals that go close to it. And just stripping this with some 22 gauge notches. And I like to tend that before putting it in place and bending it. Anyway, as I was saying, the Tonex has the capability of doing better amp modeling, or amp captures, as they call it, than the modeling done in the HX series. If you can find really good captures. And that's been the problem. It's getting really good captures. And many of the captures I've tried from some of the most highly regarded people doing captures have been all over the place in terms of the tone quality and the response. Jason Seditz has been doing really well out of the pack. Amalgam has been kind of hit or miss. And all the reviews that people leave about these things, they're all just singing their praises, that they're just amazing. And in my experience, they've not been amazing. A little bit far from it. Let me make sure this thing can't be powered on by accident while I'm in here. It's been very difficult. And it's real easy to get a fake good sound with a modeler. And by a fake good sound, I mean that you have a clean or semi-clean kind of sound, and then you just have a wall of delay and reverb added to it, a whole bunch of compression, etc. And you play that, and you think, oh my God, that sounds awesome. But if you strip away the compression, strip away the 20-second reverbs and the big stereo delays, what are you left with? Take away all that icing. Is there any cake? Sorry, this one's a bit tricky to get lined up. And what I have found with an awful lot of them is that there is no cake. It's just a kind of bland vanilla sponge thing that technically holds a bunch of icing. But doesn't actually do the interesting things that a good amp does. Doesn't feel the way an amp does. Doesn't respond the way an amp does. It doesn't have all the pleasing harmonic distortions a good amp has. It's just cheap Walmart cupcake that you put a shit ton of bad icing on top of. And it has led me to question an entire generation's experience of generating sound. By which I mean, and this is not old man shouting at clouds or these kids today with their blah, blah, blahs. If we have an entire generation that has grown up playing modelers, because, you know, the original pod came out long enough ago that there are kids today playing, young adults today playing, who may never have used a real amp, may never have needed to use a real amp, as far as I knew. That an entire generation may not know what is possible in terms of an amp sounding and feeling good. You couple that with, oh, that pin broke, damn it. Dang nabbit. All right, so I'm going to have to replace this socket. I've got sockets, that's all right. Anyway, let me undo that. And when you couple that, the fact that the kids today with their hair in their clothes may not have had any real experience with a good tube amp, may not know what they're missing, and the fact that so many bad tube amps on the market have been marketed so well, so thoroughly, and are held up as allegedly great sounding tube amps, looking at you, Blues Junior and Pro Junior and stuff like that, that even the people who thought they've been playing tube amps, their baseline for what a tube amp sounds like is not very good. Or maybe they played some old ratty deluxe reverb from 1973 that never been taken care of in its life, in which case their opinion of what a tube amp is and sounds like and should sound like is also flawed. And again, I'm not trying to be the gatekeeper of tone, but it's very frustrating trying to find sounds for that thing that can be made to be really useful when the thing that you read reviews on, everyone says, oh, that's great, get that, is the thing that kind of sits there like a turd on a plate, unless it's got a whole bunch of effects added to it. Sorry to be so eloquent with my analogy. I guess technically it was a simile, sorry. They use these giant screws for these things. Normally, you'd find a little number 6 for a preamp tube in a Fender. These are 8s or 7s, and it is, certainly, in terms of the mechanical forces involved, a 4 would have been fine. Let me get a tube socket. I cleaned that little bit of corrosion off before I put in the new belt. Paper towels were hiding from me. So anyway, while I clean this a little bit here, I've got every AC30 model in one pack from Amaran, or not Amaran, sorry, it's a lighting company. Amalgam captures up, and I'm gonna get all the comparable ones from like 2 or 3 other companies and do a shootout for myself. I don't think anyone cares about that on this channel. If you do, let me know. To see which of them, if any of them, can be made to behave closer to the real deal. What I have found is that many of them are either painfully clean / bright, or they have an edgy or breakup sound that's just full of fizzes and often painfully bright as well, as if AC30s have to be painfully bright. Like, people don't know about the cut control. And the cut control is a bit tricky on the Tonex to model because it's not as simple as just changing the amount of highs that the listener hears. It's changing the way the output tubes react as well. All right, let's put this back around and proceed. No charge for the tube socket. And I'll just know that these sockets are prone to bending / breaking going forward. Let me just reset the focus here. All right, where was I? Okay, cathodes. Physics. Depending on how well this comes across in the detail, yes, there's a little bit of melted insulation on this white wire right where I soldered. It's almost unavoidable in these things unless you want to leave some bare wire on this side where I could grab some hemostats. The important thing is not that each wire insulation be exactly perfect looking. Just a second. But rather that any melted insulation is not inside the solder joint and is not interfering with the quality of the solder joint. If I wanted this to be perfect, I would take out all this really kind of crappy plastic insulated wire and replace it with the Teflon stuff that I prefer to use. Now, if this were some priceless amp where every joint had to be sparkling on the inside, like I was working on maybe a matchless or something. Not a matchless, sorry, bad example. A high watt that Harry Joyce had wired. In that case, I would take great care not to have any sign that I had been there. And I have some very small hemostats I use for that process. But in a 1980 Vibrolux Reverb, as long as I know that I'm not going to affect the quality of the joint as far as the electronic connection goes, then sometimes the insulation has a little bit of a melt look right at the very end because it's touching the pin. And there's not much you can do about that. And if anyone's watching this and saying, well, he's not removing a lot from each wire, what's the big deal? Cumulatively, I will have removed probably over a foot or maybe more of wire from this thing by the time I'm done with this. And all that does make a difference. We're also going to know that we have very good solder joints at each one of these. All that wax that's just been sitting on that wire for the past 40-something years, almost 50 years. Sometimes the tinning works against you. right there, the plastic is trying to insert itself into the conversation, and I cannot allow that. And yeah, I hate this Era's wire. It's not fun to work with, but we do what we do. All right, so I'm just gonna take off. God, that stuff's covered in yucky stickum. We get some alcohol on this thing. I'll try to get some of the stickum off so it's not all over my fingers. Much nicer. Now on this stuff, because this white insulation wants so desperately to melt, I try to disappoint it. See what I can do in that regard. I want to tin it so that most of the work's already been done ahead of time. Got a little bulbous solder at the end, but I don't need that, so. I'm not tinning the socket connections because this is a brand new belt and they're already tinned. And they're clean, no corrosion. Just trying to shape a bit more of a bend in there. So the mechanical is in my favor. Mechanical angles of everything in my favor. All right, because the tube socket pin was already tinned, and I had tinned this wire without melting the insulation, I was able to get to work really fast, so that joint went together without any melted wires. Let's see how much I can take off of this one. Oh, a lot. Let's take off that much. Get all that old burnt stuff out. Get that stickum off. I mean, look at all that fun stuff that's on there. Daddy, he took out the tone again. All right, once again, I want to tin this because the solder, when you tin it, flows down into the twists, the strands of the wire. I can work away from the jacket and let it wick up there, because I do want solder to be embedded in the wire entirely, but I don't want to apply the tip right there against the white plastic. I was putting the tip mostly down here and letting it all wick up the wire. So I've got basically a piece of solder with metal in it, bend it in place. So it doesn't take much solder to attach that to the pin. And I can go hot and fast. This one wants to fight. Come on, gravity. Why are you fighting with me on camera? This one did perfect. This one's fighting. this old wire is kind of awful. But it's still a much better joint than it was when it came in. Got a little excess down at the base of the pin. Let me get that out. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Where did I put the thing? Here it is. I don't like any solder blobs. So, you know, drips happen. The important thing is not to work so that drips don't magically don't happen. The important thing is when you recognize that you have a drip, clean it up before you move on. All right, so let's see. That's 4 and 5. All right, so in this era of Fender, they were alternating whether it was at 9. So this was at 9, then it was at 4 and 5. I have gone back and forth and tried amps where the heaters alternate per tube socket, where they're all correctly in line. At least in these low gain amps like these Fenders from this period, it doesn't seem to matter, so I'm not going to stress it. If I were building this amp from scratch, all my pins 4 and 5 would be joined together. All my pins 9 would be joined together. People say that when you alternate the heaters like this, it gives a humbucking effect, and that's just not true. You do get humbucking from the phase inverter in a long-tail pair amp, but that's an entirely different reason. It has nothing to do with the heater supply. The important thing is, as long as you keep the heaters away from the grids in a Fender and you have a good ground reference to the heater supply, you're usually fine at that point. Usually just fine. And you don't have to worry about any esoterica. But this is how they did it from the factory, and I'm going to rewire the heaters on all this. Just, I don't know, for a Instagram shot, because it wouldn't make any difference to how it sounds or behaves. Hate this wire they used. Let's talk about Fender wire. From the 50s through about early 68, Fender pretty much consistently used really nice cloth-covered solid core 22 gauge pushback wire. Occasionally they get a batch of stranded, but still nice stuff. And that stuff's always a joy to work with. In 68, maybe late 67, they started using more of a woven cloth covered wire, very similar to what trainers often had in the period. And that is just the best stuff I've ever encountered. It really feels great. I mean, it feels like it's like a Teflon, not Teflon, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a Gore-Tex kind of thing. I mean, it really feels like a fantastic cloth, but it cut you when you cut it to strip a wire. It cuts so nice. It dresses so neatly. It just cleans up so perfectly. Wonderful stuff. Then in '69, apparently they got a bunch of spare wire from, I don't know, if the phone company, and they use this really tiny stuff. I mean, it's still 22 gauge, but it has just no jacket worth noticing on it, and it's really ugly, but it worked. And then after '69, they went to this stuff, and this is just the worst because it just wants to melt. It gets sticky, it degrades. This is stranded stuff, and it's very common. This amp doesn't have it, but it's very common for this stuff. Any exposed strands at a solder joint, it's like it just leaches up yuck from the atmosphere. You get green, funky stuff, and it goes under the jacket. So you could remove a ½ inch of jacket and find, over a ¼ inch of the last bit of the end of the wire is just corroded. This one does not have any of those problems, so I don't have any excuse to rip it all out. But I have certainly done that in other amps in the past. Now, let's see. I'll see if I can pop in a shot of this socket from early in the video when we started. Let me get this over there. So the only wire from this socket, which is coming close to these to the wires from this socket, is this one shared cathode. And when this socket is dressed better, like this one, and all the leads are just barely longer than they need to absolutely have to be. So we don't want any stress. We don't want a straight line. We want a little bit of slack, but this triode is separate from this triode. And this triode is separate from this triode, which will be separate from this triode when I'm done. All the sockets will be neatened up like this. And I'll show you in the next video what the result of all that does. I mean, this is already a long video just showing you how to do the one socket. If I were to do the entire amp on here, it'd be a 2-hour video, which would then be 10 hours of editing. So we're not going to do that. But the cumulative result of this will be very, very good. And if I was going to have to de-wax this board because of leaky DC, I would have done this end instead. But as I mentioned, this board does not seem to have any leaky DC. So every solder joint on here that I can leave original undisturbed makes my life easier. So that's where we're going to leave this video. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. You extrapolate from this. I'll do the same thing to the rest of it. And I'll just make sure I don't have to replace any more sockets. Because dang, I ain't got time for that. Thanks for watching.